Thank you.
Okay, I'll share now.
Right.
Is everyone seeing that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So thanks, Kate. Just by way of a bit of background then, so I work for Prosperous. We're a small consultancy business focused largely on carbon reduction. Our core business has historically been low carbon generation storage. We're currently working with clients to deliver 100 megawatts of renewable generation and storage, and providing a range of advice from strategy to consents, grid connections, access, land rights. But are increasingly working on decarbonisation of heat. So in addition to chipping, we're also working with Equality Heat and Caldervale. So these are two other potential community heat projects in the Northwest. And in recognition of some of the challenges those projects are facing, will face, and others will too in the future, we're collaborating with others to try and find standardized and replicable routes to navigate the barriers that community heat projects face. So with Cybermore Services Limited and Equality Homes, we've secured funding through the Green Home Finance Accelerator Scheme to develop net zero communities. I'll talk a bit more about that and the overlap with chipping in the subsequent slides. And we've also just applied for Net Zero Living Digital Accelerator funding with the Centre for Energy Equality to develop on the Fair Warmth app to try and add to it so that it can better support community heat projects in addition to the retrofit work that the Fair Warmth app was initially designed for. In terms of chipping then, it's Chipping's a rural village, very much in the heart of rural Lancashire, about 10 miles northeast of Preston. Has a long history of delivering community-based projects, starting with the Brabbins Trust, which was established in 1684. They've developed and funded a community hall, which was opened in 1999. There's a community land trust. More recently, through Broadband for Rural North, they've delivered rural broadband for the community, and they set up the Chipping Community Energy Group in 2021 to support and facilitate the transition for the community to net zero. The project to date has been RCEF funded. This first stage was completed in November 21 and was delivered by VECO. Prosperous got involved last year for the delivery of stage 2, which was this time last year, I think, where we were appointed. We've developed and built a website for the community, and on that we've hosted a community interest survey in terms of establishing interest in joining a heat network. That's live and will carry on. We've done detailed energy surveys on 20 dwellings, the school and the community hall. We've put in a test borehole and thermally tested that early this year. Got a conceptual design, and that's going to be an ongoing process as the scheme itself develops. And we're currently working on governance and funding and how we actually deliver this, recognizing the challenges, as others will, of delivering heat to rural communities. So far, within the project, had over 100 properties that have noted interest, but 66 have substantively provided enough information for us to deal with them as a serious interest in the property. Unsurprisingly, given that it's an off-gas grid community, nearly 60% of properties are oil or LPG. There's a surprisingly high number of properties on electric heating, and an even higher number of properties that have currently got air source heat pumps that have noted interest in transitioning to a ground source heat pump. Anecdotal evidence, I think, for those properties suggests that that's largely to do with the performance of those heat pumps in the very cold weather and the cost of that. So, and there is some cold still in terms of the sole form of heat for some of the older properties in the village. In terms of the air source heat pumps, whilst these properties have noted interest in transitioning to a potential, finding out more at least about a potential ground source heat pump, I think in the short to medium term, the priority for these properties really needs to fall down to additional training and support to get the best out of air source heat pumps, and also in terms of finding community scale solutions as to what we can do to reduce their average electrical input costs in terms of a community generation, community storage project. So whilst I don't see those projects necessarily transitioning, certainly in the short to medium term, to a ground source heat pump, I do hope that we can, through this project, we can deliver them a better value heat solution through their heat pumps. So we have detailed energy data on 20 of the properties, with 34 have EPCs, but 15 have no energy data. So if we were to proceed with any of those REMICs, we would certainly need to do detailed energy surveys on those to proceed to the next stage. We're very much focused on the rural challenge. We see the rural challenge being slightly different to the urban challenge, given the specific factors relating to them. And Chipping really is your classic rural village in the heart of rural Lancashire, 350 homes, surrounded by a wider sort of community of standalone properties or hamlets. 15% of the properties in the village have noted interest in joining the heat network, but 30% of the notes of interest are outside the village. So with 1 in 6, thereabouts 1 in 6 properties in the village wanting to join the properties, there are a lot of properties that haven't yet noted interest in joining the scheme, which means that, as you'll see on the plan in the bottom right there are a lot of streets in the village where only 1 or 2 properties have noted interest in joining a heat network. And I think this is likely to be a classic issue for many rural communities looking to adopt rural heat, is those early adopters within any community will limit the numbers in the first phase to whatever that figure is, 15 to 30%, but it will leave big gaps in terms of developing village-wide networks, which will make it costly and challenging to install wider village-wide networks in these, or will leave quite large numbers of houses at risk of being left behind if we focus on those natural clusters. And you'll see some clusters growing in Chipping, and there are some, and with some additional work, we could probably bring some additional properties on around those. But then what happens to the other properties? Do we leave those behind if we're targeting heat networks? And we know from experience, in terms of the work that's happened at Swaffham Prior and the work that's happened at Heat the Streets, is that whilst it's possible to develop village-wide networks, there are significant challenges in doing so, and that has implications on the cost, the risk, and the programme. So we see these as being the exception rather than the norm for rural projects. And in an attempt to reduce this dependency on getting a high percentage sign up to the scheme, bearing in mind that Swaffham Prior depended on 80% sign up, we're looking to go to reduce this dependency by focusing on a phase microcluster approach. We're looking at localized ambient loop borehole networks focused around those projects that are interested in the first phase in joining the scheme, but making sure that there's a flexibility in time to connect neighbours to those as those neighbours decide that they want to transition to low carbon heat. That could be because they are ready at that point, or they're more confident in the technology doing it. But in each case, the property would own their heat pump and their heat delivery system within the property, and would access their community-owned heat network through an annual or through a standing charge. We see a lot of benefits for this approach. It reduces a lot of the cost and risk associated with project development in terms of third-party land agreements, planning consents, Section 50 agreements, and with the Highways Authority. We've obviously been through that process in Cambridgeshire at Swaffham Prior, so we're aware of the challenges and costs of doing that. It reduces the dependency on getting that 80+% sign-up rate that most heat networks will require in order to be viable, recognising that Swaffham Prior still hasn't got that level of sign-up, but being supported by Cambridgeshire in order to get it through that phase of the project. It gives local communities the opportunity to target properties that have most to gain. So in Chipping, for example, that 39% on electric heating. All right, let's take out the air source heat pumps within that. But there's still a significant number of properties on electric heating that are paying a real premium for that heat. And many of those can't put in air source heat pumps because of their location within the village or the nature of their property. It gives the flexibility to be expanded in subsequent phases as neighbouring properties decide they want to join up, and doesn't lock properties out of the heat network as it develops. And really importantly, it starts to embed the technology, the capacity, and build those skills within these rural communities in terms of bringing the cost and increasing the acceptability of heat pump-based heat systems for these communities. In an attempt then to summarize the key issues impacting on the project, then this slide picks up on the notable ones. In terms of the grid, and this is often the key stumbling point for many projects, but engagement with Electricity Northwest has confirmed that most properties that have noted interest will connect on a connect and notify basis with a 32 amp connection. And see through the early phase, and we're not anticipating chipping, that the grid will be a material constraining factor. But that, of course, is in the early phases. We have to recognise that the grids in rural areas will face challenges as net zero targets place increasing pressure on the grid to both electrify the heat network and electrify the transport network. Highways, we've engaged with Lancashire County Council Highways. They're supportive and keen to do what they can to support the project, but there's no precedent for Section 50 agreements for heat networks in Lancashire, and there's no legislative support through the statutory provider route that other infrastructure-based asset owners have the benefit of. So that has cost, risk, and program implications in terms of having to start from scratch in terms of negotiating a solution with highways that's acceptable. Our approach, which is very much focused on developing the solution in garden where possible, i.e. so if a property has a garden, then we'll put the borehole in that garden. And this in-garden solution therefore removes that dependency on both highways and third-party landowners, and so helps in that sense. We've engaged with Ribble Valley Borough Council, the local planning authority, who are again keen and supportive of the project. And whilst the in-garden solution that we're proposing would be covered by permitted development rights for heat pumps, that's not going to be possible for all properties. So we will have to go through the planning route. And we also need to recognise that Chipping has a conservation zone through the centre of the village and has 25 listed buildings that we will need to deal with. But the experience we gained at Swaffham Prior indicates that those issues can largely be dealt with through a design approach, a design-focused approach, and that's the approach we're proposing to take in Chipping. Funding and finance, I think, for Chipping and other rural communities will be our greatest challenge in delivering a viable heat network. And when we talk about a viable heat network, we're talking about delivering a heat network that can offer heat to consumers at or below the current cost of heat, and so places energy affordability at its heart. And I would say one of the most significant challenges we face is the requirement within the Green Heat Network Fund, under the definition of a heat network, of a series of connected pipes, because this removes the opportunity for rural communities to develop that heat network in a phased approach. So put in a borehole in a single property in phase 1, add 2 boreholes in neighbouring properties in phase 2 to start building up that heat network and benefiting from the benefits of that. And so it impacts on the ability to deliver the most cost-effective network and the most inclusive, community-inclusive solution. The other challenge I think heat networks across the UK face, and Chipping is no exception, is that the recent increase in the cost of borrowing, given the high capital costs that reflect associated with developing these heat networks. So to put that into context, discussions with partners have indicated that the Public Works Loan Board funding, the going rate is currently around 5.5%, and of course funding a significant amount of debt at 5.5% and potentially a margin on top of that does start to place pressure on the business models for these projects. And in line with many other heat network projects, the business plan is showing that local generation is really significant in terms of its ability to support and cross-subsidize the costs of running the heat network and to help reduce the average unit cost of electricity for consumers. It's a rural area, and rural areas probably are at an advantage in terms of local generation because there's more space. But in the case of Chipping village itself and all the surrounding area is within an area of outstanding natural beauty, which places additional challenges on any larger field-based PV solution. It essentially rules out wind, and hydro doesn't offer any material options within the area. And so there are community sensitivities that we're going to have to address here. I see local generation as being absolutely core to the eventual scheme, but I think we're going to have to get there through an iterative stage process where we create the business case through smaller rooftop schemes initially in the first instance, and develop and demonstrate the benefits to the wider community of having local generation as part of a community asset within the village. In terms of the next stage then, for the project, because of the eligibility issues we're facing with the Green Heat Network Fund, we're focusing our delivery solution for Chipping on developing a smaller scale community funded project using the grant funding secured from the Green Home Finance Accelerator scheme and the Net Zero Community Platform to raise community finance for a community-owned network of boreholes, which would serve individual dwellings through a standing charge business model. Now, in doing this, we have to recognize that we're going to have to focus on a smaller group of properties that are able to pay for this, because in the absence of any material grant support for the heat network, and in order to deliver that, we're looking to focus on those properties where they currently have a cost premium and that they have an incentive to support, to invest in low carbon heat as a way of reducing their energy bills. As part of the project, we're also looking at community generation, noting the point I made a second ago about the area of outstanding natural beauty and local sensitivities. We're focusing a kind of a rooftop-based initial phase for that scheme, and looking to share the benefits of that through something like an energy local co-op. So as part of the next phase of the Green Home Finance Accelerator scheme, we'll also pursue a kind of energy local type co-op structure in order to share the benefits of local generation with local consumers. And finally, we're also looking to include retrofit options within that, retrofit support options within that for those that need support with the retrofit. We're looking to avoid overcomplicating the project, trying to do too much and failing to deliver any of it. So for this part of the project, we're very much focused on speaking to potential partner organisations and acting perhaps more as a signposter or as part of an integration of projects, rather than delivering this as the core of the Green Home Finance Accelerator project space. However, to demonstrate the replicability and scalability of this approach, we're really looking to bring on a couple of other similar small-scale community projects. So if anyone does know of any that they think might fit the bill and would be keen to see if they could fit in as part of the Green Home Finance Accelerator pilot project, which we're doing next, we'd be delighted to speak to you to find out more about that fit and whether we can work together to deliver those projects through the next phase. And then in terms of the Net Zero Communities next stage, we're currently in the first stage, that's the demonstrator phase, and are working up our business plan to deliver the pilot phase. So we're developing the team and the model that we will put forward as an application to DESNZ in September for funding for the pilot phase. And that is essentially to develop an online platform with a standardized delivery model for community-based ambient boreholes on this microcluster approach, where in the first instance, individuals or communities would register an interest in community heat or in joining community heat. Over time, with local support and further engagement, we would hope to develop those clusters into what we consider to be a viable cluster. I think further work's needed in terms of what a viable cluster might be, but borehole contractors are talking about clusters of 10 properties within a reasonable area in order to get the benefits of bringing the cost of putting boreholes in. You share that mobilization cost across a reasonable number of properties. So we're sort of thinking at this point that 10 to 12 would be the basis of a viable cluster, at which point we could then recruit local champions to help drive the information and data capture that would be needed to support the projects as we develop the concept design and the costings for those as part of developing the business case. And we would see that as being a business case for an aggregated series of communities, i.e. We're not delivering a single network for a single community, but perhaps a number of those in parallel, on which a community share offer would be placed, community investment would be sought, and to enable the delivery of that community heat project. So that's chipping. Hopefully that was interesting, and be happy to take questions if anyone has any.
Thanks very much, Derek. Just on your call for other communities, are you wanting them to be off gas grid as well?
I think that would help, but it's probably not central to that. What we're ultimately, we're very much focused on delivering projects to rural communities, but you obviously do have rural communities that are on gas grid, and we wouldn't want that excluding target properties. What we're really focused on is delivering some pilot projects that demonstrate the replicability and scalability of this, and so if there is interest there, then by all means we would do that. In reality, recognizing the significance of getting support through the homeowners, we're probably more realistically focused on those who have most to gain, i.e. on electric heating, and which they could generate some significant savings, financial savings, by shifting onto a heat pump based solution.
I can probably have a conversation offline with you, Derek, about some ideas on that.
Thanks, Kate.
Has anybody got any questions from Derek at all? Richard.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. I didn't quite follow the ownership model. So the community entity owns the, sorry, should I put my video on? Does that matter? The community group owns the boreholes, correct?
Yes.
And then you will put the boreholes in the gardens of the houses. Sorry, I realize we have actually got a separate meeting to talk, lined up to talk about this, but perhaps it's useful to other people. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So then you put another borehole in another garden. Assuming it's not immediately adjacent and you're not going to use the highway, then you're going to be tunneling underneath other people's gardens, or how? I don't fully understand how the bits get put in and owned by whom. And
okay, it's a good question, Richard. So let's say in phase one, house number 5 on the street wants to join the scheme. So we'd put in a borehole phase 1 for that property, and then in the next phase, neighbouring properties 3 and 7 want to join the scheme. So what we would look to do as part of the paperwork, of the legal agreement in phase 1 with house number, with the first property, is have the right to connect neighbouring properties to that borehole. And then in phase 2, you would then have the legal right to connect the new properties to that network. So you're relying on neighbouring properties in each instance. If there's a gap, then effectively, to begin with, that would be a separate property until such time as the intervening properties join the scheme. And the reason for that is that there's a significant cost of putting network into the public highway, and a challenge of doing that. And in some cases, it would make sense to do that, but in many, it won't. And it would. There are benefits. You get benefits in terms of sharing multiple properties across a borehole network. And so, for example, if you can get to if you can get to a heat network that supports 5 properties, you're only having to put in about 80% of the combined borehole capacity for those 5 properties because of the benefits of space heating diversity. But that you have to weigh that against the cost of funding a heat network in the public highway and the challenges of doing that. So we see this as being very much an iterative development process, where you're not having to negotiate with unwilling owners to put heat network to connect properties, but instead you're focusing on those willing owners that want the heat network in that phased approach.
So can I just carry on? So does that mean that you're limited by the need for contiguous gardens?
Not necessarily, because if we believe the model can be done on standalone boreholes in gardens if and where required. But all we're saying is that the model
to
has
get the efficiency.
The model has the flexibility in time to be integrated with others to benefit from the space heating diversity factor over time, but isn't dependent on it in the first phase or in those early phases.
It's probably worth noting as well that there's a current consultation open called Strategy and Policy Statement for Energy Policy in Great Britain. Responses due by 2nd of August, and it's talking a lot about the future systems operator. And in section 1, there's a section on heat pumps and heat networks, and it basically refers to the fact that there's a growing market for providing heat networks, and how Ofgem, etc., will have to look at including powers to excavate roadways. So I know Kensa are looking to become a statutory undertaker as well. So it might be that things become less complicated with time in terms of Section 50 for highways as more heat networks get rolled out. I just wanted to quickly comment as well. In terms of funding, so UK Infrastructure Bank, I clarified with them on Friday, actually, Derek, they will actually lend that, they're keen to look at projects like the one we're doing, Net Zero Terrace Street in Bacup, in part because of the social economic benefits and social impact, but they will lend lower than Public Work Loan Board. So just to clarify that. Martin, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So I was just questioning if you're putting a borehole in somebody's garden sized for that house, and you've got another 3 doors up sized for that house, what's the benefit of interconnecting? I don't see the benefits really.
Well, the benefit then would be if the property in between wanted to join, and the properties either side of it. So you get the benefits in subsequent phases where you're then able to take advantage of the space heating diversity across a wider number of properties. So what you're not having to do is put in 100% of the borehole capacity for each house if they're connected individually. But as you get up,
space heating diversity, I mean, the key metric for the borehole is how much heat you take out a year, not whether it's at 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock. From the point of view of your ground getting colder and colder. So I sort of don't totally buy the space heating diversity discussion, because if you take less boreholes, the ground gets colder and actually your air's warmer. I mean, I've done a lot of modelling on ground loops, and I just can't get them to make sense over a fractionally less efficient air source heat pump, but so much less cost. And so that's why I'm sort of probing a bit, because I can't. And by the time you're trying to connect ones, it might just be cheaper to drill another one in somebody's garden where, rather than involve 3 people, you're just one householder. Yeah. And I think you've got quite a nice sales speak, but actually it's got just as many challenges as digging up the road, which we will eventually, if District East to move forward, have powers to kind of get into, I think.
Are you saying that a centralised heat system, Martin, is preferable?
No, I'm not saying. I'm very open. It's just on ground loops, everyone is very, this is the perfect solution, which is fine for Kensa because that's their business, but it's quite nice to be busy on, I'm not saying centralised solutions are the best, but everybody needs to be open and honest about all the different risks and what risks we can manage, because we need to over time work out which solution makes most sense in which place, and there's room for everybody. And the challenge at the moment is we just have no idea of costs, and we have no idea of how things will perform over long term.
We have no idea, Martin, because these have been rolled out in social housing. I mean, I did due diligence on one 10 years ago. It was the first one to go into
on big heat networks. Then we've only got Swaff and Pride, which is frightening, but then that is the first time that's been done. And so I totally agree, Swaff and Pride is frighteningly expensive, but we need a process. So lobby government does a process to work out how we're going to improve those sorts of things. And social housing is different to a whole mix of private housing, isn't it? Because it's one landowner, single contract, sort of. And all the Swaffham issues are a lot of it is about those individual things and how we best manage.
But I think my point is that shared ground loops have been rolled out successfully in social housing for over 10 years now. Well, 10 years now. And it's about taking that model that's been quite well developed and is working quite well in social housing and transposing that onto mixed tenure streets. So I agree that, the different boreholes and actually what's the benefit of connecting them, and you talk about heat diversity, and you talk about flexibility and dumping heat, and all these are kind of nuances, but what we're saying is actually a row of terrace streets that you've done that in social housing. We've got to move that model, and like you say, Stithians and Swaffham, the complexity is around the mixed tenure and how you actually create something that can scale, that you have an inclusive, homogenous solution that everyone can sign up to, rather than saying, well, you've got to have a green mortgage, you've got to have property linked finance. So it is about the bureaucracy and administration as much as it is the technical solution.
And just to finish, I mean, the sales pitch on the central network is there's no issue about using electricity from wind turbine, you just wire the two together. Unlike local generation on dispersed schemes is problematic. And you get the value of thermal storage, which is much, much harder to achieve on individual heat pumps for very low cost. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but just to try and counter some of the to put there's strengths and weaknesses in both approaches.
But I think part of the problem is that the Net Zero Terrace Street in Rosendale is the 5th smallest local authority in the country. They have no capacity whatsoever to do a centralised heat network, and there isn't a heat.
I know, that's why we're here and talking community energy, because the community can do it. Yeah, that's
exactly.
Sort of,
but centralised systems are just so much more complex. You've got to find land, you've got to find all the money, you've got to get all the planning. I mean, that's the problem with centralised systems. They take huge amounts of resource and upfront capital, whereas this is much more street by street. You create the demand, and then. And that's the key, is creating the demand. So anyway, sorry, Martin. I totally and I agree. We've got to be really open to it, and I appreciate your challenge, Martin, because we've got to keep on questioning why are we doing it, what's the benefits, is it the best solution,
and who we need to push for what. To some extent.
No, I agree, and I think we should keep it as a lively discussion ongoing as well.
Can I just can I just respond to that point as well? So in terms of chipping, we have a high number of properties on electric heating. Now, if air source heat pumps were viable for them, they would have switched to them already, particularly given the pain they've been through over the last couple of years. So the fact is that air source heat pumps aren't a solution for every property, and that's something we need to recognise. The other benefit that this approach has, and it is a significant benefit, is the opportunity to create an infrastructure asset that can be financed in the very long term by a community on a standing charge model, and that has scale. It can be replicated and has scale, and so we recognise that this isn't a universal solution, but there isn't a universal solution to net zero and the transition that's needed. But we do need to recognise also that rural communities face their own challenges, dispersed rural communities face their own challenges. Not all communities can have a wind turbine. This one certainly can't and won't, even with a change of government. And so we need to look to other solutions.
And just on that, we did look at placing a wind turbine, Martin, down the road, but it would have been near Longridge, which is considerably less affluent than Chipping. So morally, you can't put a wind turbine where somebody else is looking at it and then run a long cable to quite a nice village to provide, because we were looking at a centralised system like Swaffham in stage 1.
Just noting on that, Kate, that Swaffham does have a long cable. 6 kilometers of cable, so they've relied on that as well as part of their solution.
Yeah, no, I know, but it would have felt wrong cabling past Longridge, which is rows and rows of terrace houses with areas of deprivation, to provide an affordable solution to chipping. Sorry, Kayla, do you want to come
I
in?
think
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Derek. That was amazing presentation. I just was wondering, do you know how many signups they have at Swaffham Prior now? Because on paper, I'm from Brighton and Hove Energy Service Cooperative, and we've done 4 feasibility studies on rural heat networks. And one of them was quite involved looking at aquifers coming from the River Derwent. And what we found is the centralized system does deliver the best value for money in principle, but it's getting all the people on that terrace street, like Kate is saying, to agree to participate in the project. So I understand why your approach is the way it is, but it definitely doesn't deliver the best value in the end, because you're doing it on this incremental basis. So I was just wondering 2 things. How much are you asking for the ground source heat pump to participate? How much does the householder have to pay? And the second thing is, how much is the standing charge under your scheme?
sorry, I was frozen for part of your conversation, or part of your first bit. So apologies, I missed that. But in terms of the latter questions, if we could target Green Heat Network funding, as other urban communities can, in effect, then obviously we'd be in a different position, but we don't believe we can, not to deliver the scale that the Green Heat Network needs, which is why we're targeting properties that are currently on electric heating and paying a premium for that.
Right.
So we're effectively in this pilot phase looking to offer them an alternative to an air source heat pump, recognizing that many of those properties actually can't physically get an air source heat pump because of constraints relating to that property. So we're looking for them to effectively cover the costs of the retrofit of their internal heating system and their ground source heat pump itself, although they would get the benefit of the boiler upgrade grant as part of that. So those costs would be for the household. In terms of the heat
But how
network,
much? But how much are you estimating that is? Because it's going to be quite a hurdle.
well, yes, let's say for your typical 4-bed house, you're probably looking at a cost of sort of in the region of £17,000 to install a heat pump.
Right.
But so this, as I say, is targeted at a market that is willing and able to pay. What we're trying to do here is to develop the replicability, to demonstrate the replicability and scalability of this solution, and to start demonstrating to government the benefits that policy support could have in changing the current requirements for the Green Heat Network Fund, so that rural communities can effectively benefit from the Green Heat Network Fund, in terms of demonstrating the policy gap. In terms of the standing charge, our target is to get to a standing charge of £1 a day. But ultimately, what really matters is that we're reducing the cost of energy to those consumers overall. So when you account for the running costs of the heat pump, that we're offering them a better solution than they currently have. That's what really matters, and that's where we need to get to. And that's challenging if you can't bring on board local generation. But if you can bring on local generation, then what we're seeing is that you can reduce the cost of that solution to local consumers. And in the process, I go back to the issues that we've seen at Swaffham Prior in delivering village-wide networks, which may offer greater value for money. I would argue that from the projects we've seen delivered so far, the physical delivery of those projects isn't demonstrating that. That's certainly not been the case at Swaffham Prior or Stithians by all accounts. Bear in mind that Stithians had a 60% ERDF grant to enable it. That we can deliver projects on a replicable standardized model in a shorter time scale. And Swaffham Prior and Stithians, they've been long-term projects. They've taken concerted effort from really supportive stakeholders in the long term, but that's not replicable across the UK in our net zero transitional timeline.
Do you know how many signups they have at Swaffham Prior now?
I As far as I know, they're somewhere between 50 and 80%, but I'm slightly disconnected from that point at the moment. But 80% was the commercial viability threshold that the project needed. The only reason it's happened is because Cambridge has taken a risk on the project to deliver it, and obviously Kensa have taken a risk as well as managed to secure the RDF funding in terms of delivering the Heat the Streets projects. But both are dependent on that firm stakeholder support and the grants to drive those projects forward.
Yeah.
And what we're looking to do is to take that risk out by delivering smaller scale projects. I do think there's a policy gap that needs to be supported, but at the moment we're working to persuade DESNZ that there is a case. Kate has talked previously on this forum about the benefit for the gigawatt voucher as opposed to the gigabyte voucher for rural communities, bearing in mind that rural broadband face the same challenges, different technology, but similar challenges. Urban providers have targeted urban areas, high density urban areas, to deliver broadband. The same will happen in rural areas, is my view, and Kate's answer in terms of the gigawatt voucher, I think, is a great solution, and that's one that I hope we can get some leverage with government and policy advisors on in terms of providing a solution for rural communities, and that would then favour the best solution for that community, and that could be a high temperature network if there's capacity to benefit from good value local generation from a wind turbine or hydro scheme or solar PV, or there may be an existing low carbon generation scheme already in place that community could target. But what we're trying to do is deliver solutions more that across the wider rural community where perhaps those options aren't available.
Thanks, sir. I think, Zach, we've got time for just a really quick question if you want to come in.
Yeah, I was just wondering about targeting on gas grid properties as well, because we're meant to be phasing out gas boilers anyway. On gas properties are probably a bit denser, closer together, smaller gardens than off-gas rural ones. So if you were targeting on gas as well, there'll be someone that wants a heat pump, and if there can be shared ground loops, that might be a
one of the projects that I'm working on, Zach, is the Net Zero Terrace Street, and that's an urban on gas grid. And I think Richard's going to present at the next one on Bishop's Castle. Is that on gas, Richard?
No, it's probably going to be Dave, but yes, I think it's off gas.
Off
Martin,
gas.
you remember? Dave's project.
Yeah, and then
off gas.
Yes,
off gas. Okay, well, after the next one, if Dave or Richard or Martin does the presentation on Bishop's Castle, the following session, I'll do an update on the Net Zero Terrace Street. We've just finishing off a couple of rounds of funding on that and looking to apply for more, and hopefully a demonstrator, get some demonstration funding as well. But very similar model, but no upfront cost to the householder, because as Kayla said, massive barrier, and especially in the area we're looking at. So it'd just be on a standing charge model.
Can I just also say, in terms, Zach, it's not that we're excluding on gas communities, but we're also recognizing that based on current consultation, admittedly there's no yet, the date hasn't been confirmed, off gas grid communities are likely to be the first communities that can't replace fossil fuel boilers, and that's imminent. 2026 is being touted as a date, and so what we're very much focused on delivering a solution for those who are in the first in the queue. And in terms of the pilot scheme that we're looking at for the Green Home Finance Accelerator scheme, it's about finding those properties that are most incentivized to invest in that transition, and so we come back to probably properties on electric heating paying for a premium for their current heating.
People on gas
Brilliant.
are genuinely happy, whereas people on oil and
Yeah.
electric aren't. And also the other
Yeah.
challenge for people who've got a gas combi boiler, a heat pump's problematic because you suddenly need to find space for
Yeah.
a heat pump. So it's better to hone our knowledge on the people who actually want a different solution and leave the more challenging ones, which are gas, until a little bit later.
Yeah, but then then you've got to think about the area we're looking at as an area of massive deprivation. So people probably aren't heating homes at all in some cases. Great, thank you everyone. That's been a really useful session. We've run out of time, but note any questions down and please ping me an email or Duncan, and we'll can get it out to various people. And yeah, we'll hopefully catch up with you all in a month. Duncan, sorry, go.
Yes, there were some things on the agenda that I just want to mention. One is that it would be great if we could set up a Google group for everybody who's currently invited to these meetings, just because it means people can converse among themselves on key issues, keep it low traffic, but it also makes it easier for us to announce this meeting and things. Are people up for being on a low traffic Google group? I will survey everybody before I do it, but okay, I will proceed that. The other thing to say is you probably know about Labour's announcements for their local power plan, 400 million a year for communities in terms of low interest loans, which will then revolve and help the development of the next generation of projects. So there's something to celebrate. There's a news item on the Community Energy England website with links to the documents. See you next month. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. Bye.